So out of all the movies that were scheduled to come out on December 2nd this year, the only real one we got was Incarnate. That's the only movie in our theater to come out on December 2nd, unless you include Moonlight, but we may have gotten it December 2nd, but Moonlight had a wide release in November 18th, so it's a November movie. So the only real movie that was supposed to come out on December 2nd was Incarnate in our theater. So saw that Tuesday. Like many movies, Incarnate feels like a mixture of several different movies rolled up into one. It's kind of like Inception and Cell meets The Exorcist with a little bit of Fallen sprinkled in there. But what's it about? Well, this young kid gets possessed by a terrible, horrible demon. And it seems like the only person right for the job at disposing of this demon is Aaron Eckhart. Now, Aaron Eckhart is not a priest. No, it takes a little bit of a different turn. Instead, he is a psychic, I believe, that can go into the minds of the possessed people. Even though you see wires on his head, and even though you see that he's getting hooked up to machines in the trailer, no, it's not through machines. He can literally do this with his mind. He says it in the film that he learned that at a certain age, he learned that he could go into the minds of possessed people, so it's a gift. The wires and all that stuff is only to monitor his brain activity, monitor his vitals, and bring him close to death for a couple minutes so that he can get into the mind of the possessed. Aaron Eckhart and his team decide, we're going to definitely do this, we're going to help this boy, but not for the sake of the boy. He's got some selfish reasons. He has a bone to pick with a certain demon. And then the movie plays out pretty much exactly what you might think it would play out. I think Incarnate was one of the movies that was supposed to come out in October. There was 2 horror movies that were supposed to come in October, but they got pushed back. There might be actually more than just 2. There might be several others that got pushed back as well. More unknown ones, like Friend Request, which looks horrible. That's been pushed back several months, I think. The Bye Bye Man, I can't remember when that was supposed to come out, but that got pushed back. I think that was supposed to be a summer movie or something. I wonder if they got pushed back because Ouija Origin of Evil did so well with critics and audience, so maybe they got scared of the competition or something like that. But whatever the case is, we now have a horror movie in December. And it's not even Christmas-based like Krampus. It's December horror movie out of nowhere. Maybe it's because they realized they didn't have much competition. And you know what? It is a pretty generic movie and very predictable and things you'd expect in this kind of movie. And in a movie where there's a possessed child and an exorcist. Now don't get me wrong, there are interesting things in this movie. There are people that are trying to make a good movie. And there are some concepts that, if done right, would be excellent and take it to a different spin. Have a different spin on this genre, on this specific subgenre of horror. But the problem is, this movie goes about those ideas and those unique concepts and goes about them in a very generic, very by-the-numbers way that just makes the movie feel meh. But there are things in this movie I legitimately liked. For one, the acting is not half bad. Most of the people are pretty good, decent, very serviceable. Nothing to the level of, wow, that is some horrible acting. Nothing along those lines. But there is one performance that does a really great job, and that is Aaron Eckhart. Easily the best thing in this movie. Because of all the people, he seems to be even the most professional because it feels like he actually gives a damn. He knows how bad this movie is, probably. I mean, some of the things he says, it's got to be tough not to laugh at some of the things he says. But he does it with a straight face, very professional, and does some range in this movie, has acting talent in this film. I think he's had a good year. He's been 2 side characters of 2 different films that I've seen recently, and that's Sully, and he was in Bleed for This. One of the best things of Bleed for This, in my opinion. And he's easily the best thing in this movie. Now, I could understand people looking at his performance in this movie and thinking that, oh, he's just going through the motions. He's just sort of getting a paycheck here. I can see how people would not see the range in this movie because he does have some subtlety to his range in Incarnate. And but most of the film, he does seem to act a little bit more like how he did in I, Frankenstein, where he was like this tough guy sort of persona, gravelly voice, our hero that is dark and broody. He's like that throughout most of the film, where it looks like he's a character that doesn't give a shit. Which ultimately he is, but he has a character arc in this film, as small and not all that developed as it is, and he has moments where he is dramatic and it's just like, God damn, this movie does not deserve you, Aaron Eckhart. And so while I will say it is a positive, I can see people thinking, oh, him actually doing a good job in a crappy movie will just make it even more disappointing because you feel that this movie doesn't deserve you and you hate the movie more for having Aaron Eckhart be so great in the film, or at least the best part of the film. I can see both sides, but I see it as a positive. When I see a positive in a movie, it is a positive. So of course this movie's not getting a 0, that's for sure. It's probably not even among some of the worst films I've seen this year, because I like some of the interesting concepts of it. Sure, it's Inception and Cell, it's someone going into the mind of a possessed person, but that is a unique concept that I like. I don't see a lot of movies do that, probably because they're like, oh, we're taking too much from Inception or taking too much of Cell and be considered copycats of those films, or maybe other films that I just don't think of off the top of my head that have that similar premise. And it's neat to see that it's a character that doesn't see these demons as supernatural beings, doesn't see it as a religious perspective. Instead, it's like, well, all these religions have different names for what these things are. No one religion should work for these creatures. I do like that aspect of the film, where it's like, oh, he's going to see them as these parasites that ultimately suck the life out of your energy and spirit, or whatever they called it in this movie. And while a religious method didn't work for this particular case, and the cases that Aaron Eckhart's character gets involved with, and even though he has distrust with religious methods used on possessed people, the movie never states that a religious method of exorcising a demon isn't completely wrong and the worst way and the worst thing possible for a possessed person. So I believe that in this world, religious stuff work and all the religion things work. It's more of a matter of will and spirit. I mean, there are things I liked with this movie, and there are a few scenes in it where I was like, wow, this was actually a pretty good scene where characters are actually acting and giving a performance and trying their hardest. Like one standout scene other than Aaron Eckhart's backstory, which is obviously the most emotional moment in the film, there's another little emotional moment in the film that I actually enjoyed, and that is the father trying to contact his son who's possessed, trying to contact the son within the possessed body, because in this movie, the parasite sort of creates a world inside the possessed mind. And so basically the possessed person is actually asleep and the parasite or the demon's in control, and to keep the possessed person sated, to keep this person asleep, they make a world in that person's mind and make them content, give them the desires that they want. And so now this father, who is the person that this kid wants to be with, is trying to contact the son. And I think that scene, the father actually tried to give a good performance, and there's some really good stuff in it. You kind of knew how it was going to end, that scene, but it was good. And I think that's some of the more disappointing things about this movie is there are moments of uniqueness. There are moments where it feels like it's trying. There are moments where there is a legitimate good thing in it, but the rest of it is either really terrible, downright crappy, or so generic and bland it's insulting. And there's a lot of stupid things involved in it too. There's scenes that feel like they're completely out of place and detached from the rest of the film. Maybe there's only one or two scenes like that. It's not a lot actually. But I guess in terms of like a 90-minute long film, two scenes could be a good portion of the film. The beginning scene of the film actually made me laugh 2 times, even though it was not supposed to. I mean, here's the scene, okay? You know the kid's gonna get possessed, and you see it in the trailer where it's this homeless person that possesses the kid because the homeless person's possessed and the demon passes on to the kid. This is where it gets a little like Fallen, because the demon passes to different people through touch. So if you've seen Fallen, that's how the demon goes from person to person in that film. So anyway, there's this moment where the kid hears a bump in the night, or some sort of noise, so he gets up, he's wondering if it's the mom. The mom's still asleep, keeps hearing a noise in the kitchen area. Instead, does the stupid thing that kids or grown-ups do in horror movies and checks it out without waking the mom or doing anything else. Goes to take a look, windows open, strings hitting against the wall or something like that, so he closes it. Notices that there's these black footprints, like barefoot footprints on the floor. I remember my dad commenting this, and I actually kind of giggled at that, or chuckled, or something along those lines. And he's like, those are some dirty feet, basically. And the footprints lead. This is what made me actually like question what the heck was in their mind, or what was going on when the person shot the film and edited it and directed it and all that. The footprints lead to this very, very small space between like a stove and a refrigerator or a counter or something along those lines. Like, not even a child or an infant probably could have fit between this small space. And the kid is just staring at it. The camera keeps zooming in on this little black space between the fridge or stove or counter or whatever it is. And you could probably barely fit a stuffed doll in it. And it's acting as though something's gonna jump out. A fully grown person is hiding in this weird space. And I'm just like, what are you trying to do, film? There's obviously no one in there. And if there is someone in there, how? But if you've seen the trailer, you find out that the homeless person is actually hanging on the ceiling. And the little kid looks up, he's like, ah! The demon's like, ah! And falls on the kid. And this is where it actually made me laugh a little bit, even though it was supposed to be terrifying. This was supposed to be a moment where you're like, holy crap! The kid's possessed now. Because what happens is the homeless person lays her hands on the kid and the demon passes on. You see the kid's eyes start changing. And in that moment, the homeless person is no longer possessed. The demon has passed on to the kid. Homeless person is still sitting on top of the child. And she's like, where am I? And then as soon as that happens, kid gets up, snaps her neck. And then looks at the screen, red eyes, and then Incarnate. And I laughed. I honestly laughed at that moment. And if you really think about it, if you look at it through the homeless girl's perspective, that would be a really terrifying experience. I mean, think about it. You're possessed. But in this world, the possessed doesn't know they're possessed at all. They have no idea. To them, it's like they've fallen asleep, and everything is looks like it's the real world. It feels like the real world, so they don't think they're asleep, but they actually are. But everything is going right. The demon gives them all their desires, all their wants, not to a ridiculous point, but enough to be realistic. So, if you think about it, this homeless person, while she's possessed, is probably having the time of her life, or at least a good life, and not so miserable at all. Having this good life, all of a sudden, she flies out of that world, is no longer in that sleeping mode, no longer in that pleasant world, and now she's awake. Suddenly, she's on top of this child, and she's like, what the hell is going on? And then, boom! Her neck gets snapped, and she's dead. I mean, if you really think about it, that's kind of really horrifying. Yet, this movie executes it in a way where it's like, I laughed out loud. This was like the first time I laughed out loud throughout the movie, and I think I laughed at least 4 times throughout the whole runtime of the 90 minutes, or 91, or however long this movie is. In this movie, they try to be very scientific, down to the point where they're somehow able to measure the energy of Aaron Eckhart, or his spirit, and the spirit energy of the kid, and the black tendrils of the possessed demon parasite creature wrapped around the green aurora of light, and you're able to measure It sounds absolutely insane how I say it, and it sounds even more insane how they explain it in this film. Like, anyone with any sort of logical sense or any sort of normal sense of science would be like, wow, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. But okay, if it was meant to be ridiculous, if it was meant to not be a serious movie, just ridiculous, flat-out craziness, it would work, but this movie is a serious approach, so it makes it really dumb. The voice of the possessed child kind of reminded me of the demon voices and the possessed people's voices in Dragon's Age. Dragon Age. That, for some reason, that's all I could think about when the kid was possessed and talking through the demon voice and a little bit of his own. Like, all I could think about is Connor from Dragon Age Origins. That's all I could think about, honestly. I do like how the demon puts your mind, puts your consciousness in a dreamlike state, but tries to make it real enough where you believe it and you're just sated and just sleeping while it takes control of the body. It does beg the question on how it's able to do 2 things at once, because you'd think there would be a lot of concentration in keeping the person asleep and happy while still being able to control the body and do whatever the hell you want. So it did feel a little weird to me, but maybe that's just me. Maybe that's me overthinking it. But even so, even with that still quality of still keeping it real, still keeping it real world enough where it's believable, I still think they could have had a little bit more creativity to the world that this demon creates for the kid to keep him happy. Because Aaron Eckhart dives into the kid's mind twice, and once to a totally different person, which you see in the trailer with the nightclub and stuff. But it still could have been a little bit more creative, and maybe it would have been fine. The things that we get in this is just generic and just cliched, and it really doesn't feel imaginative at all. Like, maybe that's the point, because it's supposed to feel like real world stuff, but even then it felt generic and cliched to the point where it was disappointing. This is yet another movie where it's a possessed person and it tries to rip off The Exorcist. Actually, it rips off both The Exorcist and Fallen in a way, because, well, I'm not going to go into spoilers in case you really want to see it, but it kind of, if you've seen The Exorcist, if you've seen Fallen, you can pretty much guess what's going to happen at the end of the movie. Because, to be quite honest, it's very similar to a mixture of those 2 endings. I did like Aaron Eckhart's character's backstory in the film, but it did feel like it was underutilized, we do get that scene, that tragic scene, but it could have been done better, especially if it was rated R, but it's PG-13. And that scene could have been done better, and maybe we could have seen a scene where he realizes he can possess people, or go into the minds of possessed people, because it's this one little throwaway line that's like, holy crap, that sounds like an interesting thing. That sounds like it could have been a whole movie itself. Like, how do you discover that you can go into the minds of possessed people? Like, how do you discover that? And he just says it, oh yeah, when I was younger I discovered the fact that I could go into the minds of possessed people. And then that's it. That's the biggest explanation you get of how he can do it and why he can do it and how he learned to discover that, because you don't know. I have to say, the whole twist and the trick at the end and the whole ending itself was way too predictable for me, and it's one of those kind of endings that it tries to be tricky. It tries to be like, oh, you didn't see that coming, and whoa, I bet that blew your mind. But it's like, I've seen that before. But that could just be me seeing too many movies and seeing too many horror movies to know, yep, that's what's gonna happen. Yep, that happened too. Oh, yep, just like I thought. And every time there's a death in this movie, it feels lame to the point of either being funny or questioning, how did they die and why did they have to die? Oh, it's because it's a horror movie and they needed death. They needed a body count, so they'll just randomly kill someone. There's this one character that dies. He gets his arm broken, which is really good and ironic. But he gets his arm broken, and then he gets slammed to the ceiling as the demon raises him up, or whatever you say. He lifts the guy up to the ceiling telekinetically, and the guy's like, ah! And they're like, put him down, let him go. And then the demon boy's like, the guy drops and he dies. Like, he fell from a ceiling. Like, the ceiling of a small room. Falls flat on his stomach and dies. Now granted, he had a horrible wound. He had a horrible arm break. Bone came out of his arm. He was probably bleeding. Maybe he bled to death. But it doesn't look like he bled to death. It looked like he died from the fall from the ceiling, because he was still screaming. He was still screaming when he was falling, but he stopped screaming once he hit the ground, stopped moving. He died from the fall. And it felt like it was just another one of those really moments. Like, I can think of many ways off the top of my head that would have made that scene realistic, or at least to the point of believable on how he could die. Either one, show that the wound in his arm, show that the breaking of his arm was so severe, so painful, so bloody, that maybe he could have died of blood loss. But it's a PG-13 movie. They're not going to show a lot of blood, so scratch that idea. Another thing you could have done is show that the demon is really forcing that guy up on the ceiling. Maybe the force of his telekinetic power is so great that it's sort of squishing the guy, or really like breaking and disrupting his internal organs. Maybe show a little force, maybe like he's getting flattened and he's just getting really pressed to the ceiling. And so when he falls down, maybe he dies before he actually falls down. Or have him get slammed down with force. Have it show that like the demon uses telekinetic powers to really smash him down into the floor. Like show the floor a little dented maybe. Show that he looks a little squished, like blood spray out or something. Hell, just have the demon do this. But he doesn't do that. He goes, he should just, or something like that to show that he's getting forcefully down, or have him land in a way that breaks his neck or something. But then again, that would be the second person to die from a broken neck. I don't know, there's so many things that you could have done to make that death scene seem believable. Instead, it looks like he dies in the lamest way by falling from the ceiling of a room and not even landing in a way that looks like it was possible that he could have died from. For the most part, this movie is lame, it's very meh, it's very generic. a few really terrible, really stupid moments throughout, but a few really good moments and interesting ideas that keep it from being a 2-star movie for me, keep it from being anything lower than that, but not enough to give it 3 stars, so I'm going to give Incarnate 2.5 stars. Probably more than it deserves, but I kind of liked it. I think it was a throwaway movie, but it could have been okay. It could have been actually good if they would have put more effort into it, like Aaron Eckhart and a few of the actors and actresses that really did show some scenes where they gave a damn. So, did you see Incarnate? What'd you think about it? Go ahead and comment below. And if you like this video and you want to see more, please subscribe and check out my movie reviews. I've got movie reviews of 2015 and 2016. As always, this is Bruce Gifford, and this was Just My Opinion.